Today, we're diving into a case that was nothing short of a showdown for the soul of Indian democracy. It asks a really fundamental question. Who's the boss? The parliament, elected by the people, or the constitution that gives parliament its power in the first place? This is the incredible story of Keshavanandha Bharathi versus the state of Kerala. So let's get right to the heart of it. Picture this. A government gets elected with a massive, absolute majority. Does that give them a blank check to change anything they want in the Constitution? I mean, the really big stuff, the core principles, the very identity of the nation. Is there a line they can't cross? That's the explosive question the Indian Supreme Court had to tackle. To really understand this case, you first have to get your head around this massive clash of ideas. It's basically a constitutional tug-of-war, a battle between two very different views of where ultimate power should lie. And this slide lays out the two sides perfectly. On one hand, you've got parliamentary sovereignty. This is the idea that parliament, because it's elected by the people, should have the final say and the absolute power to change any law, including the Constitution. But on the other hand, you've got constitutional supremacy. This camp says, not so fast. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and everyone, including Parliament, has to play by its rules. So how did this epic philosophical debate even make it to a courtroom? Well, you might be surprised to hear it didn't start with politicians or lawyers in Delhi. It all began with a single man, a spiritual leader in the south of India, just trying to protect his monastery. Meet our protagonist, Keshavanandha Bharathi. He was the head of a Hindu monastery in Kerala. Now, he wasn't a political firebrand or anything like that, but a fight to protect his institution's property was about to set off a constitutional earthquake that would shake the entire country. So here's what went down. The state government in Kerala passed some land reform laws, which basically allowed them to take over land belonging to the monastery. Bharti challenged this in court. But here's where it gets interesting. His lawyers decided to go bigger. Way bigger. They didn't just challenge the state laws. They challenged 3 recent amendments to the entire Indian Constitution itself, arguing that they gave the government way too much power and trampled on his fundamental rights. And we're not talking about minor stuff here. These are some of the most basic freedoms you can imagine. Article 25, freedom of religion. Article 26, the right for religious institutions to manage their own affairs. And the big one at the time, Article 31, which was then a fundamental right to property. The argument was pretty simple. If Parliament can just amend the Constitution and take away these core rights, is any right really safe? And just like that, the stage was set for a massive legal showdown. The case shot all the way up to the Supreme Court, where the very soul of India's democracy was about to be put on trial. The two sides laid out their arguments very clearly. Bharathi's team argued that the power to amend a document doesn't mean you have the power to destroy it. You can make changes, sure, but you can't just tear down the whole building. The government, on the other hand, argued that for the sake of progress and social justice, it needed total, absolute power to change any part of the Constitution as it saw fit. So the court was in a really tough spot. If they sided with Parliament, they could be paving the way for a dictatorship. But if they sided with Parsi, they could be blocking important social reforms. What they came up with was, frankly, a stroke of genius. And to give you a sense of how big a deal this was, get this. The court assembled a bench of 13 judges to hear this case. 13. It was and still is the largest bench in the history of the Indian Supreme Court. That tells you everything you need to know about the stakes. And the final decision? It was a nail-biter. It came down to a vote of 7-6. I mean, think about that. The entire constitutional future of the world's largest democracy was decided by a single vote. Just incredible. And here is the landmark verdict. The court introduced a brand new idea, something that wasn't actually written in the Constitution. They called it the Basic Structure Doctrine. And what it says is this. Yes, Parliament can amend the Constitution. It can even amend fundamental rights. But, and this is the most important but in Indian legal history, it cannot change or destroy the basic structure of the Constitution. Its fundamental identity is off limits. This is probably the best way to understand it. You can renovate your house, right? You can paint the walls, change the flooring, maybe add a new room. Those are amendments. But you can't take a wrecking ball to the foundation and the main support beams and still claim you're just renovating. At that point, you're demolishing the house. Well, the basic structure is the Constitution's foundation. So what exactly is this basic structure? Well, the court was pretty smart about this. They didn't give a complete, final list, which keeps the doctrine flexible, but they did give some clear examples of what they consider to be the non-negotiable core principles. Things like the supremacy of the Constitution itself, the rule of law, the separation of government powers, and judicial review. And, of course, bedrock principles like federalism, secularism, and free and fair elections. These are the pillars that hold up the entire democratic structure. You really can't overstate the impact of this decision. It wasn't just another court case. It was a defining moment that essentially saved Indian democracy from a path of potential authoritarianism. Let's just break down the fallout here. Constitutionally, it was a game changer. It drew a clear line in the sand. The Constitution is supreme, not Parliament. Judicially, it massively empowered the courts, making them the ultimate guardians of the Constitution. And politically, this is huge. Just 2 years later, India went through a period called the emergency, and this doctrine became the legal firewall that stopped the government from completely rewriting the Constitution. And this wasn't just some abstract theory, okay? The doctrine got put to the test again and again. In 1975, it was used to strike down a law that tried to make the prime minister immune to judicial oversight. In 1980, it reaffirmed the limits on Parliament's power. And as recently as 2007, the court confirmed that absolutely no law is beyond the reach of the basic structure doctrine. It has been a powerful shield for democracy. So if you take away just one thing from all this, it's the beautiful balance that this case created. Parliament's power is, as this says, wide but not unlimited. It created a system where the country can change and adapt with the times, but without ever being allowed to destroy its democratic soul in the process. And that really leaves us with a fascinating question to think about. This whole story was about India, but the principle itself is universal. So what do you think is the unchangeable core, the basic structure of your country's constitution? What are the lines that you believe should never, ever be crossed?